everybody. Welcome to the Cyclonic Thrift Podcast, a series focusing on deck building, card analysis, and financial speculation, all through the eyes of Commander player on a budget. I'm one of your hosts, Zach, joined as always by.
Christian, hey everybody.
So today we're going to be doing a review of the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set that released last week. Uh, so we're going to be going over some of our favorite cards that we think are really strong for a budget play group, and some of the commanders specifically that we like from this set. And overall, I thought this set was pretty good. Christian and I were talking yesterday, and I think one of the things that I liked a little bit less about this set compared to, say, Modern Horizons 2, which we did a set review on recently, was that there was definitely a lot more uh, thematic cards in this set. Seemed like there
hmm
were like three main themes going through the cards. Was like obviously dungeons was a big one, and I wasn't a huge fan of that mechanic. And then dice rolling and treasures were both also big themes in the set, which I liked more. I think treasures are really strong, but uh, you know overall I think the set was good, and there's definitely some interesting commanders and other cards that came out of it.
Yeah, definitely. I know we even talked about when we did our Modern Horizons 2 review that there is no overarching
Hmm.
theme in the Modern Horizons sets, which it's kind of a negative of the set, but it is what it is. In this case, yeah, we went really heavy on theme. Me personally, I really liked the almost D&D moments. Like you find prisoners or whatever, you find the villain's lair, guards approach you, then there's two options of what you need to do with that. I thought that was really flavorful and really cool. Um, I also liked the dice rolling. I thought it was pretty cool. I know, obviously, anytime a mechanic has a random effect to it, it's arguably weaker, but it was still a fun way to have a random mechanic, I guess. So yeah, I thought the set was really good overall. I know we talked about that this time. Um, it was a lot harder to pick our top cards because there was a lot of good options in some of these colors. And um, overall, yeah, it was really enjoyable. I am with you though. I'm not fully in love with the venture into the dungeon yet. Um, I don't know. I don't think it's the way you venture, but I don't think some of the effects on the dungeons are as powerful as they could be.
Yeah, I would have liked if we had maybe more dungeon options,
Yeah.
like that. I don't know. I just overall, I think there are other things you'd rather be doing that are going to be stronger in Commander than venturing into dungeons.
I 100% agree. That's the thing too. I'm not asking for like 10 dungeons, but I kind of wish there's only 3 obviously, and I would kind of have liked to seen like each dungeon kind of have the vibe of each of the 5 colors in Magic. That would
Yeah,
have been nice. Looking at them, one of them feels very mono black, the other one is almost like red whitish, and the other one is kind of salty-ish. It's weird. I don't know. Like in their effects, they seem to have those colors. So
yeah,
yeah, I would have expected to see 5 dungeons, each of them associating kind of with the effects of a certain color, and then be good. But yeah, they're kind of just all over the place. So
yeah. All right, so guess we'll jump right into it. The first set of cards that we're going to be going through is our top cards per color, and we're just going to go in Wheatberry order. So we'll be starting with white. My top pick for white was Loyal Warhound, which is 1 and a white for a creature dog. Has vigilance to 3/1, and it says when Loyal Warhound enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for basic plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. I think this card is good just because in white you don't have a lot of ramp options. That's definitely been changing slowly over the past year or so. With more recent sets, we have had a couple additions in ramp as far as or additions in white as far as ramp goes. I just think this card is good. It's cheap, mana wise. It's going to trigger most of the time. Uh, as long as you're not first, you should be able to play this turn 2, unless everyone else missed a land drop or something like that. But I think most of the time you're going to be able to get value out of this early in the game. Uh, And I'd say that's the only con is there is that conditional. But
Yeah, I totally agree with Loyal Warhound. We talked about it. This just barely missed my cut as the number one white card, and if not, showing up in my top five. Um, it's just good. I mean, like I told you, in most cases in Commander, you're gonna get that condition off. You're probably playing someone against that's running green, like we said, and if you're going last, even up to second, you should be hitting that trigger. And otherwise, it's a rampant growth of the 3/1 body with vigilance. Obviously you can only get a planes, but that's just kind of White's thing, is they always just get planes. So yeah, this car's just kind of good. Um, and I actually, when I looked at it, I thought it was going to be more expensive than it is. So I was kind of surprised to see its price and was happy with that.
yeah, yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable budget wise. I forget what the card was that we got recently. Maybe I'm on Horizons 2. There was another white
Yeah.
ramp card that ended up being pretty expensive, but I forget what it actually was.
Yep, I remember. I know what you're talking about because I was trying to think of it, but I can't remember. But yeah, Loyal Warhound is sitting at 87 cents market price, so it's just it's in a sweet spot, I think, for especially for a mono white deck if that's what you're building.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess I will jump into my number one white card overall, and that is Minimus Containment. It is an enchantment aura that costs 2 and a white, and it says enchant non-land permanent. Enchanted permanent is a treasure artifact with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and it loses all other abilities. So, this card is obviously great for a number of reasons. Cheap mana cost at 3 mana at white, and it can hit any non-land permanent. Like, right there. Obviously, it's got the typical white removal where, it's usually an aura gets placed on something or an enchantment comes down, and if the enchantment is removed, it goes back to normal. That's just typical white spot removal in most cases. So, it fits the mold. It's not any, necessarily better or worse than those. But also a lot of times, like Banishing Light, I believe, only hits creatures. Um, or at least a number of them only hit creatures. And this hits any non-land permanents. That just makes it very powerful. Also, one thing I really like is, sure, if they decide to do this, you are giving them a mana of any color, but the fact that they can be tempted to just crack their own permanent at any point for a single mana is kind of fun, I guess. It's just the temptation's always there, and I like this card a lot overall, and um, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I agree. I think this card's really good. I really, really like the uh how it basically turns it into a treasure token. I just think that's really cool and uh more flavorful than a lot of the other options you have with this
Definitely.
kind of similar effect, like an O-ring or anything like that. It's I just think this is a little bit cooler and probably better in that you could potentially destroy the enchantment, but I think a lot of times this will probably get cracked before that happens. But I don't know. We'll see how it actually goes. But yeah,
Yeah,
I like this card a lot.
yeah, and sitting at 11 cents right now, I mean, you just can't beat it. It's just good. Um, so yeah, I think it's a pretty top quality budget option for our format in white.
Yep. All right. I will jump into my top blue card then. So for blue, I chose You Find the Villain's Lair. This is 1 blue for an instant. It says choose one. First option is foil their scheme. It says counter target spell. And the second option is learn their secrets, which says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Uh, yeah, I like this card just because it's really versatile. Obviously, countering spells and drawing cards is something you just pretty much always want to be doing in blue. Uh, so both effects are uh, just always going to be relevant, pretty much, which I like. I feel like a lot of the choose one cards is, you're either almost always going to choose one or the other options. not one or the other. You're almost always going to choose one option over the other one because the other one might just not be relevant to what you're doing. I don't think that's the case with this card. Uh, as far as cons, I would just say it is a little bit more expensive than other budget counterspell options. Like, counterspell itself would be two blue blues. This one, or sorry, would be just two blue. As this is one more generic than that, so it's a little bit more expensive. But overall, I think it's really good and just always going to be useful and very budget friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes in at only 9 cents right now, which um this card shows up later in my list. Um actually, does it show up later in my list? I think this is my number one blue card also.
Yeah,
Actually, yes, it is. I knew it was in there somewhere, and yeah, it is my number one blue card also. This card, as soon as I saw it, I believe it was fairly early in the spoilers, and anytime there's modes, that's just good. Stick them at instant speed, even better. And then, 3 mana, that is a little bit more expensive than some of the premier counter spells, but your dissipates and your dissolves, those all come in at 3 mana. Your sinister sabotages, all those things all come in at 3 mana. So it's not like terrible, right? It's not awful because of that. But it also has modes on it. And the second mode, I mean, I was really excited. Normally it's like, look at the top two and pick one or something. But no, this is straight up draw two cards and then discard two cards. I think this card's fantastic. I'm actually planning on running it. I'm working on a deck that is running it. I really, really like it. And again, at 9 cents, you can't complain. So that is also my number one blue spell from the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.
cool. So we'll jump into black next then. So for my number one black card was Deadly Dispute. So one on a black for an instant. Says an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact creature. You draw two cards and create a treasure token. Overall, I just think that being able to draw two cards for 2 mana is really good. I don't think you're concerned in black about having to sacrifice a creature. If anything, that's going to be a benefit to you most of the time. And treasure tokens are just good. You're going to get an extra mana out of it, and you might get some sacrifice value from sacrificing the treasure token if you're playing Corvold or something like that. Just cares about sacrificing permanents, and it's instant speed. So I just think there's no downside to this card really. I think it's just really strong draw.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this card does actually come up later in my list this time. It's not my number one black, but it does come up later. So I fully agree with Zach here. This card is sweet. I mean, at 2 mana, um, and the fact that it produces a treasure, in the end, you kind of only paid one for it, and that puts it at the same level as Village Rites. And Village Rites, you only have the option to sack a creature, not also an artifact. So in a way, it's just as good as Village Rites or better. Um, and Village Rites, as we know, has come out to be a real staple in our format. It's just super, super good. Um, so yeah, Deadly Dispute is a fantastic card. As soon as I saw it during the spoiler season, I'm like, yep, I already know this is going to end up on the podcast somehow because it's very good. And obviously, anything in instant speed is just great. And it's currently sitting at 24 cents. So I think it's a pretty easy include in the decks that care about it. Most black decks probably just care about it. Like we talked about, if you're playing black, you're probably in a fairly black game plan anyway. So I think this is going to find its way into a lot of decks just for the sheer efficiency of it.
Yep, I agree. Right, jump into your top black card, Christian.
Sure. So my number one black card for the set is Power Word Kill, which costs one in a black for an instant, and it says destroy target non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creature. So at first glance, you may not think this card is great because of how many there's 4 creature types you can't target. But when I saw this card, the first thing I thought of was Victim of the Night, which is an older removal card from Innistrad, and I believe that's non-zombie, non-werewolf, non-vampire creature. And that card sees a lot of play and it's very good in various formats. And I think this is at the same level. Two-word removal at or two mana removal at instant speed. I think it's just kind of good. Sure, maybe the opponent lays a big old demon. You can't remove that, but you couldn't remove it with Doomblade anyway. There's just various things that it's not that big a deal. It at worst case, you just use this to remove a value, one of their value creatures, which is more than likely probably like an elf or something like that in different decks. Those type of creatures usually have those good value effects on them. So yeah, I just think despite its conditions, it pretty much kills everything you're gonna want it to for 2 mana at instant speed. I just thought it was good. And again, comparing it to Victim of the Night, I think in that having proved it sees play, I think this should see just almost as much play as Victim of the Night.
Yeah, I think this is good too, especially when you think about black has quite a few budget options that are like destroy target non-black creature, which I think is a lot more
Hmm.
limiting than this is, because then
I agree.
you got 1 out of 5 chance that it's going to be a black creature basically, whereas with these subtypes, there's just so many different ones that it could be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point to mention because I know I mentioned Doomblade, but yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was talking to someone the other day about I am so astonished by how many times I've tried to cast Doomblade and I couldn't because it was a black creature I was trying to kill. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't seem like it'd come up that much, but it comes up so many times that I've actually took Doomblade out of all my decks because it just has let me down so many times. I think this is just like you said, 1 in 5 chance in color versus 4 out of how many creature types are in Magic? Probably like 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep. And this is at only 28 cents right now, so pretty
great.
reasonable. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I think it's good. Good budget. The conditions aren't too bad. I really like this card.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a strong pick. So, yep. Go down to red. I had a harder time choosing with red. I think I'm kind of on the fence about the cards that I did choose, but what I chose was Unexpected Windfall. So this is 2 red for an instant. It says an additional cost to cast a spell, discard a card, and draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. So obviously there's some pros here. It's a similar effect to Thrill of Possibility, but you also create treasure tokens. So it does cost one one generic and a red more than Thrill of Possibility. Uh, I think it's good, and the drawing, especially in red, is always good. And depending on what deck you're playing, you might care more or less about the treasures. Like I mentioned earlier, if you have something that cares about sacrificing permanents, the treasures could be pretty strong for you. Or if you're playing anything that synergizes with artifacts in general, this could be good also. It is 4 mana, so it's kind of a lot to invest in just a draw spell, but you could look at it as 2 mana since sacrifice the treasures for mana. But I think overall it's a decent card and it's going to be pretty cheap.
Yeah, I agree. This is in like my top red selection, and I also have to agree with Zach that red for me was the winner of this set. I had a really hard time deciding between what was the best cards in red. Um, Even like my best cards out of all of them, I have a pretty sizable handful of cards that could have made this cut. Um, Unexpected Windfall being one of them. Yeah, it's good. Like you said, I mean, if you have the 2 treasures enter, it's kind of like paying 2, which makes it another Thrill of Possibility. And Thrill of Possibility that we talked about before is a staple red draw card in our format. So yeah, this card is just really good. And sack effects, making artifacts is just good in red typically. I don't think you can complain about this card. I think it does what you want it to do pretty much. If you're running it, you know what it does, and that's what you want to be doing.
Yep, yep, I agree. And right now this card is sitting at 13 cents, so everyone knows.
And that's a good spot for it, I think.
Yeah.
Um, all right. As for my number one red card, again, I took quite some time to try to decide this. and I will explain why I chose You Find Some Prisoners. Is an instant for 1 in a red, and it says choose one, break their chains, destroy target artifact. And the second mode is uh, interrogate them. Exile the top 3 cards of the target opponent's library. Choose one of them. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So the number one reason I chose this card is for 2 words. Red Anticipate. It is a 2-drop instant that does exactly what Anticipate does in its red variant for the interrogate them option. You basically are going to look at the top 3 and choose one. That's what Anticipate does. On top of that, you have the option to remove an artifact at instant speed if you need to. So with that in mind, I just saw this and was like, man, this is great. And if you've been listening to the podcast, Zach and I have talked about multiple times how the exile mechanic is getting better for red. It's not actually that bad, especially in our format. You might as well view it as red card draw. So yeah, this is a red Anticipate in my eyes. I think it's very good. And I was actually, I always try to look and see if there's, I see a card in these sets and I'm like, wow, that's good. And I want to make sure, there's no card you could be running instead of it, right? Like if this card's good, oh well, okay, it's great and all, but why would you not run this card that's just better over it? A lot of artifact removal. There's only 2 or 3 artifact removal spells. I thought, if I remember correctly, that is a 1 mana at instant speed. So I think this is just better for 2 mana instant speed. You have the option to anticipate. It's just good. I like it, and it's sitting at 19 cents right now. So I really like this card.
Yep, I agree. I think especially like so the second option there is really powerful, and obviously spot artifact removal can never hurt to have. But yeah, I think being able to play it, especially till the end of the next turn. I've seen a couple of cards recently that are you exile, but you can only play it till the end of the current turn, which I like a lot less because you can't really you know you have to hold up the mana basically for that turn, so you would have to cast this pretty early on in the turn to get value out of it. Whereas if you can cast it next turn, you've got a lot more versatility there. All right, so I'll jump into my green pick. So for green, I picked Long Rest, which is X green 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 for a sorcery. Return X target cards with different mana value from your graveyard to your hand. If 8 or more cards were returned to your hand this way, your life total becomes equal to your starting life total, and you exile Long Rest. So pros for this card is there's no restriction on the CMC of the creatures that you're actually returning. So if you wanted to return, say, like an 8, 7, and 6 drop, it would only be 3 and 3 green, which I think is pretty good for budget recursion, especially in mono green, since you are somewhat lacking in recursion options. And I mean, if you really wanted to return a lot of things, you could potentially go back up to 40 life. I don't think that's going to happen all that often because you're going to be spending 11 mana to do that. But there is some potential there if you really need the life gain. You could put 11 mana into the deck or into the spell and go back up to 40 life. So the cons are it could get expensive if you have a lot of things you want to return, and obviously it would be really nice if you could put these cards into the battlefield rather than just going into your hand. But that would probably be pretty busted. And it exiles itself, so kind of a con. You're not going to be able to use it more than once unless you can pull it back out of exile. But overall, I like this card a lot. I think it's pretty strong.
Yeah. This one sort of flew under my radar when I was looking through green. Like I told you about it, Zach. I'm a green mage, so this set in green, I was honestly kind of disappointed. Um, I think you talked about to me as well about how green just lacked in options for budget this set, which is kind of disappointing. Some of the more expensive green cards are pretty good, but in terms of your jank rares and your commons and uncommons, stuff that we will be running for the most part, just didn't really blow me away. But
Yeah.
like I said, I didn't have this in my top green, so I did kind of gloss over it a little bit. But I think it is actually pretty good. Um, the fact that, like you said, there's usually it's like return things with CMC X or less, right? But this just get if you want to pay 5 and get 2 9 drops out, you can do it. Um, the thing I like a lot about this is, or a 9 drop and an 8 drop, I should say. The thing I like a lot about this is, to me, I see it as your post board wipe reaction. You're sitting
Mhm.
there, got a good board state. The guy in front, before you use like, I gotta do something, wipes the board. He casted, Day of Judgment or a Fumigate or something. Well, you just followed up, and you're probably playing either two color or one mono green deck. I mean, 3 green is kind of expensive to pay in a 3 color deck, so you probably just spend the next turn dumping all your mana into that and pulling everything out, and you're set for the following turn again. That's where I see this coming into the most play and being its most powerful. And for that, I do like this card a lot.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought as well. I'm building a Wolfgar deck right now, and I saw this and I actually ended up putting it in there because I do think, decks like that and, maybe other decks like Rakdos or Xenagos, you're probably going to be dumping a lot of creatures out of your hand at some point if you, get to your optimal board state and just kind of go all out. So I think this is a good recovery card if there is a board wipe or something like that. You're not going to be sitting there with no creatures left in your hand, so be able to cast this and get some more value out of those creatures.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know if you said, I'm pretty sure it's sitting at 22 cents right now. So that's, I
Yep.
mean, like I said, jank rare right there, obviously. So if you pull it in a pack, you're not going to be happy about it, but you'll be happy about it for trying to fit into a deck. So,
Yep.
my number one green card for the set is you find a cursed idol. 1 in a green for sorcery. It says choose one. Smash it, destroy target artifact, lift the curse, destroy target enchantment, steal its eyes, create a treasure token, and venture into the dungeon. So, we mentioned that we don't like venture into the dungeon a lot. I just figured at 2 mana, you get a treasure token, which kind of brings it at 1. You basically pay 1 to get a dungeon effect. I didn't think that was too bad. On the Steal Its Eyes option, if you're in the middle of the dungeon, paying 1 mana to, make 2 black skeletons. If you're in um, the Mad Mage's Lair, whatever the dungeon's called, that's pretty good. Paying 1 to scry 3 is not bad. So there's a couple spots where this actually feels fine in the venture into the dungeon section. I mean, even to kick it off and enter a dungeon is probably fine overall. But I also just like the fact that I like modal cards. I like having options, and this gives you 3. So destroying an artifact, destroying enchantment is also just good on 2 mana. Sure, it's a sorcery, but overall, I just like all these options, and the Venture the Dungeon being stuck on a Moto card that also gives you treasure at the same time made me say, you know what? I think that's good enough, especially on top of the fact, like I said, there wasn't a lot of green cards that blew me away. And this is only 10 cents. And again, I'm not saying you should run this in your green decks necessarily, but among what I could find, this was the best green card from the set in my eyes. So I don't know what you think about it, Zach, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think, like you said, as far as the uh, Steal Its Eyes card or effect, I would much rather play this over some of the other things that were, as far as like the common venture into the dungeon options is like 3 CMC for you say like a 2/2 or 2/3 creature that just ventures into the dungeon. I can't see ever really playing that unless I'm specifically care about venturing into the dungeon, and even then it's just it's like very one-dimensional kind of effect. Whereas with this, like I said, create a treasure token and you're basically paying 1 to venture into the dungeon. So I think it's fine. You might be able to get some value out of that. And if you care about venturing into the dungeon, I think this is one of the more efficient ways to do it.
Yeah,
And the removal is always relevant.
exactly. That's my thing is, if you're gonna run if you're at the point where you're trying to run a naturalize or maybe even a return to nature, maybe I think it's better. I think it's better than just naturalize it, or not naturalize
Mhm.
nature's claim. Or no, yeah, naturalize. Naturalize is the one I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Nature claim.
naturalize is
Nature claim's a good one. Yeah,
yeah.
naturalize. I think you just run this over naturalize.
Mhm.
And what is it? Fade to antiquity. I think you just run this over. Um, so yeah, I just saw it as like in some cases a strictly better version of some of these basic green removal. And
Mhm.
again, if like you said, if you are in a deck that's pushing dungeon right and you're pushing through these and trying to complete them, paying one green to get to the next room is I think fine if that's in your game plan. So
Yeah. Yep. I agree. All right, so we will jump into our top five cards overall at this point, since we've gone through all of the colors. So, uh, for my fifth overall card, uh, I chose Sorcerer class, which is blue and red. And the first effect is when Sorcerer class enters the battlefield, draw two cards, then discard two cards. So you can pay a blue and a red to get to level 2, which says creatures you control have tap, add blue or red, spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell or to gain a class level. And level 3 is 3 blue red. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, that spell deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instants and sorcery spells you've cast this turn. And this is an enchantment also. Uh, so the reason that I chose this card is that all the abilities are relevant. I think these are all things that you would like to be doing in blue red, uh, especially the first two. Drawing and discarding cards is just never really going to be bad for you. Uh, you know, having your creatures tap for mana is always going to be relevant, and getting a little bit of extra burn is just going to be good. It is a little bit expensive for level 3, I think, for 3 blue red. I don't know. There's probably a lot of other things you'd rather do for 5 mana, I think, but I think the first two levels are really strong. And you get that immediate payoff when you play this with the draw two, discard two. I think that's good, especially for 2 mana. Uh, but yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty strong class card compared to some of the other ones. I felt like some of the abilities weren't as relevant as these are.
yeah, I 100% agree. Sorcerer class is actually my number two overall out of the top five. I think this card's great. Like, and this just right off the bat, if you're doing a deck you want to be digging, or if you're building a deck you want to be digging through, red and a blue to draw two, discard two is already like something I'm looking at. But then you can basically pay one red and a blue to activate a cryptolith, right? In red blue. I mean, come on, that's insane. All your creatures can add mana. Sure, you can only cast in sorceries, but I mean, that's insane. One of our buddies is building a deck, and I said, "Why don't you put this in there? I think it'd be great in the deck." He said it's insane. Um, and yeah, 5 mana to reach the last class level is a little expensive, but level 2 says you can use it to pay for instance spells and sorcery spells and gain a class level. So your tokens or your other creatures can actually help you get to level 3, which makes this even better. So I think, like you said, Zach, the other class cards just lacked. It felt like sometimes they just didn't do a single thing I cared about, or they
Mhm.
took too long to get any value out of it. They just cost too much, but this feels crazy. I mean, 4 mana to draw two cards, discard two cards, and turn every creature into a mana dork that taps for red or blue. Like, come on, that is already
Yeah,
good. And
yeah,
then you can use that to get to everything burns now. I mean, this card is just crazy. 86 cents for it is nothing. I think in obviously not every single red blue deck is going to run this, but many, many, many red blue decks I think are going to run this card. So snag it while you can.
yep, I agree.
My number five overall is Guardian of Faith. That is one white white for a creature spirit knight. That is 3/2, and it has flash, vigilance, and says when Guardian of Faith enters the battlefield, any number of other creatures you control phase out. Obviously, with Teferi's protection being unbelievably expensive and just not an option in our format, And obviously, fog is good, but fogs don't protect you from board wipes. And there are very few things that protect your entire board during a board wipe. This is just good enough, I think, to make it into our top five. Paying 3 mana to flash something out to dodge a board wipe for your creatures, and it's on a 3/2 vigilance. I mean, I think it just does everything you want it to do. No complaints. It just gets the job done. Again, it just does what you want it to. I mean, it's going to protect you from a word wipe, and that's just what it's there for. Maybe the use cases are a little bit lower than you'd hope, just because that's pretty much all it's going to do. But it just does it so well.
Yeah, I think that's like the only real drawback to this card is I think 90% of the time you're going to be playing this either as a response to somebody else's board wipe or in conjunction with your own board wipe to save your creatures. Uh, and I think it's really versatile in that you don't have to phase out all of your creatures necessarily. So like you could keep up
That's
some
true.
blockers if you wanted to, if you wanted to keep some tokens or something else to chump block for you, that's still an option. You're not necessarily exposing yourself until your next turn. So I think it's a really versatile card.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It is our most expensive card that we talked about at $3.10, which has gone up a little bit since I looked at these cards, but um again, you don't have the removal safety nets like you do in a competitive format in budget. So I think if you want one, this is going to be your kind of single option. Now we talked about, does the budget go towards utility? Maybe that's a place you sacrifice it. $3 is a high cost in budget. But if you tell yourself I need to have some type of board wipe protection, I think this is your go-to.
Yep, I agree. All right, I'll jump into my number 4 card here then. So for number 4 overall, I chose Zorn. It's 2 in a red for a creature elemental. It says if you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. And he's a 3/2. So, I think that treasures are already really strong, and this just makes a good mechanic even better in my mind. It's pretty cheap for 3 mana. Uh, the only downside is that if you don't care about treasures, you probably don't care about this card at all. But I just think it's good. I like things that kind of take a good mechanic and make it better. So think it's good. We talked about Academy Manufactor in Modern Horizons 2, and this is kind of a similar thing. So I like it.
Yeah, I agree. Zorn actually comes in at number 3 overall for me. Right, another place up from Zach's spot. So obviously, I agree with the placing overall. I mean, 3 mana to double stuff feels really good. Um, well, not necessarily double, but in addition, if you lay a single one, it's doubling it. So it's just powerful at 3 mana. And like you said, if you're playing treasures, you're definitely running this. Obviously, you're not playing treasures, you just don't care. But I expected this card to be really expensive. Whenever it was spoiled, when we looked at these cards around that date, it was sitting at about $2. It's 2.24 right now. And again, if you're playing a deck that cares, I think this is an easy force include because it's just going to get you so much value overall from what it does.
Hmm.
All right. You good on Zorn, Zach?
Yep.
Cool. My number 4 overall is Deadly Dispute, which you've already talked about. Great card draw. I don't think there's anything else really to say on that, Zach. Um, so I guess we're good to move on if you are.
Right. Yeah, and we've actually already talked about my number 3 as well, which was Guardian of Faith. Yeah, like I said, I don't have anything else to add. Just think it's a good card overall.
Right. Um, and we've talked about my number 3, which was Zorn, just a minute
There
ago.
you go.
So we are heading right up to spot number 2 with all that.
All right, so number 2 for me was Feign Death. This is 1 black for an instant. Says until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. I just like this card because there's no real downside to it. It's really cheap at 1 black, and I see this mainly just as a way to save your commander or some, key piece to your deck. Somebody casts, Source of Plowshares or some other removal. You just respond with this and, keep your creature from dying. Actually, not Source of Plowshares, because technically this wouldn't work for that because that gets exiled. But anything that destroys your creature, uh, this would help save it. So I think, for 1 black, I would run this as protection for my commander and other key pieces.
Absolutely. This almost was my number one black card actually. Um it's in my like top 3 overall. Just I love the Gift of Immortality and the Kai's Ghost form type effects that just save your stuff from dying, especially at 1 mana at instant speed. I mean, that's just good. Um I think a lot of these cards in our top 5 have kind of just been they do what they do just so well, and that's all there is to it. Not a lot of there is no downside for this card, like you said. I mean, I don't you can't make it any better. I think right, other than not entering tapped. But I mean, 1 black mana to tap your guy and save it is nothing. I know you said about the swords thing. Like, yeah, that's true. But think of everything it does dodge. It dodges your mortifies, it dodges your putrefies, it dodges your terminates.
Mhm.
Pretty much any black removal. Like this gets you out of everything. I mean, even a board light, it gets your
Yeah.
commander out of if you want to use or anything out of that you want to use it on. So it's just good. And at 10 cents, this is a premier utility card. I think.
Yeah, I agree. Especially for 10 cents, that's, extremely reasonable.
Hmm. Um, my number 2 card was Sorcerer Class, which we've already talked
Uh,
about. So we
yep.
are heading to number 1.
And we've also already talked about nine, number one, which was Minimus Containment. So,
That is a good one. And that's another thing, real quick, is any of these top 5 cards. We did a top card in each color. We did top 5 overall. Some of them are mono color. A lot of cases, they're fairly interchangeable overall. Not
mhm.
exactly, but generally speaking, any of the cards we picked prior could have potentially ended up in the top 5. So yeah, and obviously Zach and I do our list separately just to add a little bit more variety, have our own minds kind of work together. We can disagree, agree on different things, give you guys more options. So just clarifying that before we move on. Oh, and my number 1 card is Eye of Vecna, which is a legendary artifact for 2 generic mana. When Eye of Vecna enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 2 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card and you lose 2 life. Um, I just saw this card, and the first thing that came to mind was like a Staff of Nin, um, Mind's Eye, those type of effects. And this is only 2 mana. Sure, you're gonna take a little bit of a beating for 2 life. You have to pay 2 to do it, but a lot of these effects at artifact for drawing cards, you have to pay for. And I just saw this as premier in white decks. You don't have a lot of ways to draw it all in white. Even some red's gotten a little bit better, but this is probably still fine in red. Plus, red cares about artifacts. Even green, I think it has a home in green. Um, just at the top, beginning of your turn, pay 2 mana, draw a card. I don't think that's bad in any way, shape, or form. I don't think you can complain about it that much. Um, I just really thought this card again it does what it does well and easily, and at 2 mana to have uh you know just consistent card draw option is good, and it's only 75 cents. Again, you take a beating if you use it a lot, but I think it's a small price to pay to guarantee card draw, especially in the colors I mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. And like you said, you can run it in any deck since it's colorless artifact. You know, paying 2 life. Obviously, if you do it a lot, it's eventually gonna start chipping away at your life total. But if you're running it in, white or something like that, you probably have a little bit of life gain anyway. Uh, yeah, I think it's good. Consistent. You can choose whether or not you want to draw triggers every turn. Just that's good, I think.
Yeah, I like it. Like I said, you're everything I already said about it, so I'm not gonna repeat myself. But I just think having the card draw on hand for 2 mana is just
Mhm.
good in a lot of different decks.
Yeah, and you get that enter the battlefield, so you get a little payoff immediately.
Yeah, true. Any immediate payoff's better than setting some down and waiting to get value out of it, so that's true as well.
All right, so I think that's yeah, that's both of our top fives done. So
Yep.
we'll jump into our last segment here then, which is top five commanders. So my number one commander was Oswald, or number five commander was Oswald Fiddlebender. He is 1 and a white for a legendary creature, gnome artifact, and he has an ability called Magical Tinkering, which says pay 1, tap, and sacrifice an artifact. And you search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifacts mana value, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle, and activate only as a sorcery. So I like this commander because I think it's really versatile. It's like a Birthing Pod-esque kind of card, except for artifacts, which I just think is really cool. I think there's a lot of different ways that you could build this, and I think it's got a lot of potential both as a commander or as a card in the 99. Would be nice if you didn't have to tap it, or you could do this at instant speed. I think those would both uh, improve this somewhat significantly. Uh, but yeah, overall, I think it's just a really interesting commander option.
Yeah, I agree. He's my number 4, so just one place higher than you put him. I think that tier is about where he falls. I mean, anytime you put a pod effect on anything, it's probably good. And I don't even know if we've ever had. I think there's only one other. I don't even actually know if there's a pod for artifacts till now. I could be wrong, but um, I think
And
it.
not that I can think of.
Yeah, I don't think there is either. So I mean, that's just good. Um, it's a very cool, cheap effect, like you said. Again, instant speed be nice, but is what it is, and he's good in the 99. Obviously, that's another thing that makes him good. Uh, we're generally viewing all these commanders as your commander. So he's $2.37. Obviously, the commander does not cost in the budget, so that's not really important, but still, it's cheap. And I think, like you said, you could take it so many ways. There's a lot of ways artifacts can be good, and he pretty much lets you do any of them because he just tutors for them. So yeah, I like Oswald Fiddlebender a lot. Um, all right, moving on to my number 5 overall is Hama Pashar, Ruin Seeker. She is a legendary creature, human wizard, for 1 generic white blue, and she's a 2/3. And she says, room abilities of dungeons you own trigger an additional time. So I know Zach and I throughout this episode talked about not really caring as much about dungeons, but we figured, or at least I figured, and I think he has her somewhere in here. I think if you are going to push dungeon, you have to be playing this person as a commander because I don't think either of us think that the dungeon room abilities, any of them, are particularly great, other than some of the last ones. But any ability twice is just good. So, making 2/1/1 skeletons twice is good. Scrying 3 twice is insane. Like, I think there's just so many ways that if you're going to play dungeons, she is just the absolute way to go. You fill the deck with Enter the Dungeon. You're going to get so much value off everything going off twice. Um, and just for the sake of the set being the Dungeons Dragon set, had to put some kind of dungeon commander in here somewhere. So Ham Pashar is my number five commander overall for those reasons.
Yep, I completely agree with what you said. That was pretty much the reason. This comes in number 3 for me, but the ordering for at least for like my bottom 3 commanders is probably pretty interchangeable. But I think if I'm gonna run a dungeon commander, this is definitely the one that I would choose. I think white blue got some of the better support for dungeons in this set, and
Definitely.
like you said, even though some of those abilities are kind of lackluster, any ability that gets you any value that you can do twice and only have to pay, 1 white blue to cast your commander, to get that value is you know definitely going to be pretty good. Especially if you can get multiple dungeon effects per turn or anything like that. If you can really push that game plan hard, I think you could get a good bit of value out of this.
Yeah, and she's 9 cents right now. So, I mean, can't complain. Uh,
Yeah.
she's only an uncommon, of course, but I think for me, Zach, while we're on this topic of dungeons, I think for me, it's just so hard to value the adventure in the dungeon cards because it's so dependent on what room you're in. Like if I pay 4 mana for a 2/2 with, you know, vigilance that ventures in the dungeon, that's just bad to me if I'm in the first room to scry one. But
Yeah.
if you're in the last, if it's gonna hit the battlefield and make you a 4/4 with legendary god horror or whatever with death touch, that card's great. But it's just so inconsistent, and you never know what room you're gonna be in when you draw these cards. That I think the fact the value is so out of whack. I think that's another reason why we just aren't in love with dungeons. But again, any effect doubled is going to make whatever you're doing to get that on top of the doubled effect good enough, I think.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's inconsistent, but it's also like if I'm putting all these venture into the dungeon cards into my deck, what am I running that's actually going to win me the game? Like
Right.
a lot of these dungeon effects are more utility, like draw cards. Some of them, like you said, create creatures. That's a potential outlet if I can create a bunch of these big creature tokens. I just don't really see that as being the go-to win con in a deck that cares a lot about dungeons. Maybe it is. I just wish there was something that I could you know look at and say, yeah, this is the best option for me for a win con in this dungeon deck.
Yeah, I
So
mean, just thinking, we're in blue white with Hama Pashar. I'm just thinking maybe like infinite ETBs on Adventure the Dungeon Creature, and you just go through every
yeah,
room infinite
yeah,
times. But at that point, your dungeon just happens to be what your infinite ETBing. Yarok, you have infinite ETBs as a win con. You don't care about dungeons. You have it some other way. It's just, dungeons is the other way. It doesn't particularly mean it's any better. I'm just thinking if that could be a win in these colors with dungeons. It's just infinitely going through it with adventure ETB card. So I don't know. It's interesting. I'd be curious to see someone in our playgroup build this commander, just see how good it is. So
yeah. I'd be curious to see how many of these venture into the dungeon cards you actually need to run to make it work. Because if I need
yeah,
to
that's a good
run,
point.
15 venture into the dungeon effects, I'm gonna have to cut 15 things from, say we're going with the infinite ETBs, right? I'm gonna have to
Hmm.
cut things out of my bounce effects or blink effects or anything like that that are gonna let me bounce these creatures and just, I guess in a way, if you're on like the Mad Mages way or whatever it is,
Hmm.
you can look at that as your card draw source, so maybe you cut out some of the card draw
Yeah.
that you would otherwise run. But I'd be interested to see, what that kind of critical mass of venture into the dungeon things is that makes the deck actually work.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of thinking and forethought of in terms of the deck building to just
Hmm.
know where you're gonna get what you need from. I think that's a common thing with all mechanics that are new, though, too, not just
Hmm.
dungeon. Anytime there's a new mechanic, there's effects you want to do, you almost just never have enough of that effect to make a deck for it. Like Ixalan, I love Explore. Um, Ikoria, I love Mutate. Throne of Eldraine, I loved Adventure, and I'd love to see commanders that care about each of those. I think maybe Explorer has one. I'd love to see a commander care about each of those. But even if they did, even if there was a commander that cared, I don't think there's enough of any of those types of cards in whatever colors the commander could be to even make the deck work at this point. It would take like a return to Eldraine and a return to Ikoria and
Hmm.
another Ixalan set to make any of those relatively viable, I think. And I think Dungeon is the same case.
Yeah, I think particularly dungeon because, like you said, eventually we're probably going to return to the other planes. But what are the chances of another, D&D collaboration
Right.
set? It's probably pretty unlikely. So
Yep, I would
I doubt
agree.
we'll see dungeon support again, at least anytime soon.
Yep. Well, I think we've talked about dungeons and Hamapashara enough to move on to your top four overall, I guess.
Yep. So for number 4, I chose Xanathar Guild Kingpin. He's forward blue black. He's a legendary creature beholder, 5/6. And he says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You can look at the top card of their library anytime. And you may play the top card of their library. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast spells this way. So I think the important thing about this is it prevents interaction from whoever you choose during your turn. I think that's pretty strong generally. Maybe it's just our pod, but I feel like most of the time we have one deck that is going to be doing a lot of the interaction as far as like countering things or killing things, anything like that. I think usually there's one person that is doing a lot of that versus everybody interacting a lot. So you should be able to choose that one person and maybe cut out some of the possible interactions. I think this would be good if you're going to win on this turn or the next turn, and you want to just make sure your stuff's not going to get countered by that person. Choose them, and they basically can't do anything to you that turn. As far as being able to play things off the top, it's kind of hit or miss. You never know what you're going to hit. If you hit a land or something, you probably just are stuck. So let's see, you could play it, but if you've already played your land for turn, obviously you're not going to be able to. So it's something to think about. I could see this being good in the 99 of like a Sun Triplets deck. Somewhat similar effect. It is a little bit expensive. It's 6 CMC for a commander, and like I said, it's a little bit luck based on what you get as far as if you're leaning into the casting things off the top a bit.
Yeah. Xanathar was an interesting one. I had to read him like 3 times to really make sure I knew what was going on. And yeah, I think for me, I agree with the fact that his most powerful scenario, I think, is shutting down the guy that would counter your combo or counter your win con or whatever it may be by just choosing them. They can't cast anything. If someone else does, you might be able to rip off a counter spell off the top of the deck. Like I think it's just great for that. Um, any type of mind control ish effects is always fun. He does that. Uh, he is a little expensive. Sometimes I wish he could do a little bit more, but overall, stealing things, mind control, shutting players down from doing anything, he kind of does a little bit of all that. So yeah, I think he's a pretty cool card overall. I always want to see new and not mill based blue black commanders, and he is that. So that makes me happy. And he's currently $8.50. So I think he's pretty good, and he might be a little bit on the more expensive side, but that's probably due to him being a mythic and it's Xanathar. I know you read the D&D books, but I know I've heard this name plenty of times, having not read the D&D books, and I'm pretty sure a pretty big character in the world. So I'm sure
Yeah.
that has some weight to his cost.
Yep. All right.
Um,
Uh,
that was
yeah.
your number 4 overall, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My number 4 overall is Oswald Fiddlebender, which we've already talked about. So, yeah, moving on to number 3, I guess, for you.
Okay. Yeah, we actually also talked about my number 3. So I'm a Pashar. Ruin Seeker was my number 3.
All right. Cool.
Yeah.
My number 3 overall is not one we talked about, and that is Delina Wildmage. She is a legendary creature, elf shaman for 3 in a red, and she's a 3/2. Whenever Delina Wild Mage attacks, choose target creature you control, then roll a d20. If your result is 1 through 14, you create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it has exile this creature at the end of combat. If your result is 15 to 20, create one of those tokens, roll again. So this card is insane for a number of reasons. Obviously, 4 drop is not bad for a commander. And then I just, out of all the mechanics Zach and I've talked about, we like rolling dice a lot. Obviously, it's a little bit weaker because of randomness, like we talked about, but rolling dice is just fun. I think it's cool. I think it's more interesting than flipping a coin. Um, and in this card's case, even if you get a 1 you still get the minimum result. Um, so you're gonna get a copy that's already beaten face, and it can be a legendary creature, which is really cool. So you can even choose her. Obviously, you won't get the attack trigger, but worst case scenario, you at least can make a copy of her. And if you get the best case scenario, you get the token, but you get to go again. So in a good world, you just roll, 3 15s in a row at minimum. You could just make 4 copies of something. Um, and that's just insane. I really like this card. I was interested it was an elf in red. You don't see that often. So that's cool. But yeah, I don't know. As a mono red commander, this is actually something I think I would enjoy building.
Yeah, I agree. I really like this card. This actually came in as my number one commander. Uh, but I think it's really good. Like Christian said, there's no bad outcome here. On a 1 through 14, you're gonna make a token, and you got a 30% chance to make more than one token. So I think that's really cool. Technically, you could make 3 or 4 or 5 if you're really lucky. Uh, but yeah, I think this is really cool and interesting commander. I think it's also good in the 99. This
Hmm.
is going to my Wolfguard deck just because
Oh, you
you know,
madman.
yeah. So you make at least two tokens every turn in Wolfguard. If he's out, you trigger twice. So I think pretty strong. But yeah, I like this a lot.
Yeah, that's very good in Wolfgar. She's just good. She's abusable. So that's good. I um I think that only if I had to pick a weak side, she has to attack.
Hmm.
So you're gonna want her to be indestructible or unblockable or pull her out of combat once she's attacked. I don't know if that would trigger. Either way, you need to protect her because she's got to swing. So you need to make sure she's safely getting through her combat. Whisper Silk Cloak would be good for that. Rogue's Passage, things like that. So yeah, other than that, I think she's just straight good. So I'm excited to
Yep.
see her on the battlefield. And right now, she is a jank rare at $1.11. So that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. Cool. So I will jump in my number two here then. And for number two, I chose Volo Guide to Monsters. He's 2 green blue for legendary creature, human wizard. It's a 3/2. And he says, whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, copy that spell. So I like this for a couple of reasons. I think it feels unique compared to a lot of other Senate commanders. There's another Senate commander in the set that it was like the the epitome of like Senate commanders, in my opinion. I forget what it actually did. I think it was like whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card, or something like that. Or maybe it was you pay to draw a card. Either way, I think this is unique compared to a lot of other options in Simic, and it's an interesting condition to build around. It might be a little bit harder in budget to get a consistent deck out of this since you're not going to be able to rely on those creature type based synergies as much. And technically, you can still run the same types. You're just not going to be able to copy it. But I think being able to copy creature spells is a pretty big payoff. Obviously, if you're running like a lot of big creatures and you can just copy those without having to pay any extra mana or anything like that, it's going to put you in a pretty good spot with being able to have basically get double value out of all of those things.
Yep, I agree, and I agree so much that Volo actually came in my number one commander overall because I just really like him. He's unique. He's cool. At 4 mana, 3/2, that's fine. And you know me, Zach. I love commanders. We don't do any extra work.
Mhm.
And he is that. You just cast a creature and you get all the value he produces for doing things you're gonna do anyway.
Yep.
So I really like that about him. He's only a buck 17 right now, which I think that's a steal. I think he's great. Um, yeah, obviously, like you said, in budget, it may be a little bit difficult to build because you can't have a single creature share a type. Well, you can, but you get less value out of this card. There's a lot of elves that just do good stuff you want to do, so you might have to,
Mhm.
whiff on some of those to make sure you're getting him off, which is arguably a little bit more important. I mean, of course, if you have one elf and you double it, you're probably going to tutor for both those lands anyway, so you should be mostly fine. So overall, I like him a lot. I know when he came out, I was like, I might disassemble my Zuri deck and just build Volo 'cause he's just super cool. Plus, again, I think Volo is another one of those characters that is really big in the D&D universe, and I like his art a lot. He looks really cool. I just like everything about this card. I like green and blue. I like his cost. I like what he does. I like how he does it, and he just seems like a cool character to have a card based around. So
Yeah.
that's why he came into my number one. He's just a 10 out of 10 commander for me, so I'm happy about it.
Yep. I agree. And I really like I think building a deck around him would be really fun just because of that restriction. Even if it's not doesn't end up being the strongest deck you built, I think this would be fun and interesting to build around.
Definitely. Moving on to my number two overall, and that is Old Gnawbone. So it is expensive at 5 generic and 2 green. It's a legendary creature dragon that is a 7/7 flying creature. And it has whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Um, I just thought this guy was kind of awesome. I feel like it kind of has that red effect, sometimes that red green effect where you get mana equal to attacks and damage and stuff. So it has that, but in mono green. And I think this is just peak mono green stompy, mono green monsters nonsense because you just lay all kinds of big stuff. They beat face for 6, 7, 8 damage, and then you get, all that it back in mana in the form of artifacts. So, that even has some value potentially. There's sack value in that. So, like, let's say you go to your turn, he swings, you swing with a 6/6, and you hit some other guy with a 4/4, right? That's like 17 damage across some people, and you get all that back in treasures. I mean, your second main phase is going to be explosive. So I really was like, this is sweet, man. And at 7 mana, that's a little shaky, but you're also in mono green. All you're doing is ramping. So I don't see a world where you really have trouble getting this guy out.
Yeah, I like this guy a lot. The only reason he didn't appear on my top 5 list, I think, was just, well, the 7 mana for one is painful on a commander a little bit. Just thinking about it. Like you said, you're gonna ramp a lot in mono green. Uh, and the other thing is he's pretty expensive right now at let's see,
Yeah,
$23,
he's
twenty
yeah,
five cents. So playing him in the 99 and budget is not really going to be
not
an option.
possible. Yeah,
I would love to play this in Wolfgar in the 99. I think would be great in
insane.
that deck and a lot of other decks, obviously, that are just, mono green or gruel, big stompy creatures, give stuff trample. There's just a ton of potential here. Uh, but yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, looking at it as just a commander, absolutely, because yeah, there's no way this goes in the 99 of a budget deck at all. But
Yeah.
as a commander, I just think it's cool. I mean, if nothing else, the effect is just cool, and that was enough for me to say, you know what, he's my top 5 because he's cool. Compared to all the other legendary mythic dragons that we got, I didn't like the other
Definitely the
ones.
best. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like the other ones at all. Maybe the red one with that burns someone for 20 if you fire breathe it to 20, like that
Yeah.
was pretty cool. But icing death I did not like. I think Ebon death or something was the other one that was horrendous, especially at least in commander. um
Yeah,
I
Icing Death and the black one were definitely more like standard effects, I think.
yeah,
Like I just didn't care about the equipment at all, and yeah.
yeah, I just didn't care about them. So I really liked, big green dragons, cool, in the D&D set. But yeah, that's my number one or my number two overall. So I guess we'll
Yeah.
move on to your number one overall.
Well, I think that actually wraps everything up here because my number one was Delna, who we already talked about.
And my number one is Volo, which we just talked about. So yeah,
Mhm.
which is actually interesting because out of the 5 best commanders, we only had one differ. You had Xanathar and
Yep.
I had Old Gnawbone. The other four
Yep.
were all the exact same and relatively similar spots too. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's
that,
interesting.
that is very interesting. I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say like we're the experts to anyone listening, but I mean, it's kind of interesting that two people playing in the same format found 4 out of 5 cards being the best of commander options. So I mean, I don't know if that speaks to these cards, but give them a whirl. If you're listening and you want to go budget, maybe give one of these commanders that we talked about a shot in our top fives. I think they'd be fun. So, yeah.
Yep.
Any closing remarks on this set, Zach, before we wrap it up?
Not really. I mean, just to kind of echo what I said at the start, is, there are a lot of cards in here that I think maybe play into specific strategies and would be, auto include if you're really leaning into that strategy. Like there were several cards that cared about dice rolls, like I don't remember the specific cards, but I know there's effects like, if you're gonna roll dice, roll one more and disregard the lowest roll, stuff like that. And it's like obviously if you're pursuing that strategy, that's a card you're going to include. And we didn't cover some of those because of the specific reason that you just don't care if it's outside of anything you're doing. Like if you're not dice rolling, you don't care about that card. But there's definitely cards worth looking at in the set that we didn't cover. But yeah, I think overall, there was some strong stuff in here. Maybe not as strong as other sets, but there's definitely some interesting stuff, especially I think in the commanders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think compared to our first ever set review of Modern Horizons 2, I think overall I was happier with this set than Modern Horizons 2, actually, in terms of budget. I don't. What do you think, Zach, about that?
I don't know. I think I liked a lot of things in Modern Horizons 2. I think it had a lot more things that were just good in a vacuum, whereas this has more things that are like, if you're playing that strategy or that, theme, you're definitely going to play that card.
That's a good point. Yeah, it did have a lot of specifics. And again, that's the nature of an actual standard set, I guess. Other than
Mhm.
a core set, is there's an actual theme going on. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the set. It was good. It was fun. I enjoyed talking about it just now. There's a lot of cool cards. Some I might actually run because there's some good stuff in there. So yeah, uh, pretty good set overall. I'm excited to see what the rest of the year looks like.
Yep.
All right, everybody. Well, if you enjoyed listening, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more of our content we have coming out soon. We have our Adventures in Forgotten Realms Commander deck review coming out, where we'll be analyzing the various mythic commanders from the sets, the poster cards. Beyond that, in the description, there's also links to our Discord and our Twitter, where you can join our community and follow us as we post news in our latest episodes. And beyond that, I think that about covers everything. You good to go, Zach?
Yep. I'm good. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.